I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm doing this intro again because Ali fucking hates it, and Andy is still not here because I think this is the last one he's going to miss, but he's almost finished moving into his new castle, and hopefully next week or next episode he'll be back with us.
Yeah.
So, well, Ali, how you doing?
I'm okay, except for the fact that you decided to kick me this morning, and this when I was sleeping.
Yeah, sorry, when we were sleeping, let's be very clear on that. We were both asleep. I was having a dream.
I don't know
where
you
I kicked something and I ended up kicking Ali in the foot, which woke both of us up to her going, eh! But yeah, so...
Except for that, it's okay.
All right, cool. But we're just to clarify, I was not consciously awake when I kicked her.
Yeah.
I was very much asleep.
Like the other day when you punched me, the other time when
I
you
was
kneed
asleep.
me.
When I was asleep.
Yeah. Sure, if you want to say that. But why not?
It's the truth.
I don't know. I was sleeping. That's all I know.
Look, enough trying to stitch me up for crimes I didn't commit. Let's look at other, well, I mean, according to some people, kind of crimes that were being committed, but not really. We're going to keep going. This is part 2 of our Surviving the Andes series. So if you haven't listened to part 1, I mean, obviously, probably do that first because...
Yeah, we covered a fair bit.
Covered a lot, yeah. When we last left off, they had just set out and they found a radio and some batteries that they were trying to see if they could send a radio signal out to get...
Because you just found the tail.
Yeah, exactly, because they found the tail of the plane where they found some batteries and they had a radio back in the cockpit and they tried to sort of make a radio to contact the authorities, but unfortunately for them, the battery was, I think it was like a 24 volt or something, and they needed 115 volt or vice versa. So that's where we sort of left off, and now what we're focusing on now is the trek that happened to get them to help, to get rescued.
Something I do want to clarify, though, from last week's episode, we talked about one of the people that got impaled during the crash.
Yeah, Enrique.
No, that was Roberto, I think.
Oh, it's Roberto.
Roberto, yeah. He had his stomach sliced up and his entrails basically sticking out.
Yeah, he was impaled.
He was impaled, that was
and so a bit of his intestines came out when they pulled out
and we were pretty sure that he had survived the whole ordeal, but no, he actually didn't. But he was one of the ones that died during the avalanche. Yeah,
that when he was asleep in the in the what do you call it? The fuselage, which packed it full of snow and 8 people died. Unfortunately, he was one of them. Imagine that. You've survived a plane crash, you survived being impaled, you survived a couple of weeks in the freezing bitter cold snow with no food, eating people, and then you just die in the middle of the night because of an avalanche.
Yeah, it's fucking horrible.
Wow.
Yeah, but last week the last episode we said that he had survived the whole ordeal, but unfortunately he didn't.
No.
But we still had 16 people that survived?
Yeah, I think we're up to 16, something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, 16 might be 19, actually, I think we're up. No, because to start this one off, there's 3 deaths.
Okay.
So on November 15th, so this happened after the attempted radio frequency call, Arturo Noguera died after, and then followed 3 days later by Rafael Echevarren. They died from gangrene because of their infected wounds. So they'd survived. Well, the plane crashed at the beginning of October 7th, I think it was, or 6th? 13th. See, my memory is not so great. So, I mean, they'd survived literally a month and then died of gangrene. So, but on top of that, there was also a lady who refused to eat human meat, Numa Turcati. I know, sounds Italian to me, so I said it that way. She refused to eat human meat, so she died on December 11th, the 60th day after the crash.
Jesus.
Weighing 25 kilograms, or 55 pounds. I think literally, like, one of my legs is probably almost 25 kilograms. Basically, I mean, this person survived almost 9 weeks, basically, without eating, because they refused to eat meat. So they were just withering away, and unfortunately she died. And that sort of death of her was sort of the final straw where the survivors that remained the 14 that were left sort of just said, you know what, like, or 16 that were left, sorry, it said, fuck it, like, we have to get out of here. Like, and only us can get out of here now. We can't wait for a rescue that's not coming. Even though they did hear on the radio at some point, or on a radio, that the Uruguayan Air Force had restarted searching for them as the snow had started melting.
Yeah, but that's the thing. At that point, they weren't looking for survivors. They were looking for bodies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what they were going to do is just pass over the Andes and just take photos. And obviously these photos would take weeks to develop. And by that point, even if they would have seen them on the pictures, they would have been dead.
Yeah, exactly. So basically they decided, you know what, we're getting out of here. And that's where this episode really focuses on that. They call it the rescue trek.
Mm-hmm. And what a fucking trek it was.
It was pretty crazy. So let's get into it. So of course, like the first challenge in this case for any of the survivors, they all know, and particularly the other ones that left a few weeks earlier, you know, where they found the batteries in the tail section of the plane. They went off on a little voyage and they were like freezing at night, right?
Yeah.
So of course the biggest challenge for them was, if you're gonna go and trek tens of kilometers through the snow, like, they need to be able to survive at night. Mm-hmm. That's the priority one. So the survivors that found the rear, like the tail of the plane, came up with an idea that they would make sleeping bags using insulation, copper wire, and waterproof fabric, you know, that sort of shiny fabric that they wrap air conditioning ducts and units in.
Yes.
So they use that to tailor sleeping bags.
Yeah. I think it was one specific person that dedicated to making those sleeping bags.
Well, sort of.
Okay.
So what they did is they took insulation bats from like in the walls of the plane. And then instead of making because 3 people were going to set out on the trek, not all of them, because obviously some of them were too unwell and it didn't make sense to send. And obviously they could only carry so much food and so on and so forth to feed so many people.
Yeah.
So what they did is, instead of making one sleeping bag, 3, they decided to make one, because they thought obviously if they could all, with their shared body heat, sort of be in the sleeping bag that was at least good enough to keep in their body heat, then they would survive. Mm-hmm. So they took the big bats of insulation, they sort of folded them in half. They sort of folded it in half to make it, you know, a bag instead of just like a blanket.
Yeah.
Used copper wire and the waterproof fabric to make it waterproof on the outside. And then they got a man called Carlos Paez, who was actually taught by his mother to sew when he was a kid. And she had I think she was a passenger on the plane who died, and she had a cosmetic bag on the plane that had a sewing kit.
Oh, okay.
So he was sort of tasked originally with like sewing together the materials to make the sleeping bag. But of course, like, it would be inefficient to just have one person doing that. So he actually started teaching the others to sew together, and all of them, the survivors, worked together on sort of like rotating shift. And I think 3 of them were very proficient. They found after a little while they had like a natural talent for it, and they sort of pretty quickly stitched together this sleeping bag. The 3 survivors that set out on the voyage, I guess on the trek to be rescued, were Roberto Canessa, Nando Parado, and Antonio Visitin. Mm-hmm. They set out after a bit of persuasion, actually, from Nando Parado. He was like the guy, everyone, especially after the death of the lady who basically wilted away.
Yeah.
Numa, that sort of shocked, especially Roberto Canessa, and he was like unsure, I think at that point kind of in despair.
Yeah.
And so it took a lot of persuading, but Nando Parado on December 12th, like the day after Numa had died, basically convinced them, like, you 2 are coming with me, and we're going to climb up the mountain, over the peak, and down into the valleys of Chile and find someone to help us. So on December 12th in the morning, day 61 after the crash, they began climbing the peak of the glacier. Mm-hmm. They started at an altitude of 3,570 meters, and without any gear, eventually made it to the peak, which was 4,670 meters above sea level. So they climbed over 1,000. They climbed 1,100 meters
with no gear.
With no gear, no like professional climbing gear on a glacier. Snow and ice covered, waist deep snow, starting to melt because of the summer sun. So it was quite soft, so you would fall into it. It wasn't compacted.
Worst.
Yeah.
Like, if you've ever never walked in snow when it's melting, and like I'm talking deep snow,
it's hard.
It's a nightmare. I just remember the time when we were up in the north of Sweden just after our wedding, And we were just tracking from the back of my friend's house to another place because we were going to go ride snowmobiles.
Yeah, this is up in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, and I just kept missing the trail, so I kept falling into deep snow. And eventually I just lay there because I was like, it literally came up to my boobs. I was that far down, and I was like, I can't get up.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
And that's like, you've been eating and you're fully fit, and you haven't been surviving for 61 days starving to death.
Yeah, and I have proper clothes on. I have a proper jacket, proper shoes, proper everything, and I was still like, no.
Yeah, no. These guys did it without, like, all makeshift boots. Yeah. They were wearing like 3 layers of jeans, like 3 jackets over their polo shirts. They had like makeshift socks that they made from insulation, like 3 layers. And like skin and stuff that they had put in. And over 10 days, so in total, by the time they actually got rescued and they found people, of course they did, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this, they tracked for 10 days, and they actually trekked 38 miles or 61 kilometers, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this is like as the crow flies, 60 kilometers. So you're going up and down mountains, through valleys, through snow, carrying, what little food and supplies you have with you.
Dad said, my dad told me something because I started talking to him about this. And he said that they had made kind of like little sleds out of the seats.
Yes, we'll get to that a bit later. Yeah. Part of the problem here, so you remember the heights I said, they started at 3,500 meters, and then the peak is 4,600 meters. Because of the pilot's dying statement that they were near the town of Curicó, they thought that they were near the western edge of the Andes and only about 2,000 meters above sea level.
Yeah.
So in fact, they were basically double or 60% higher than they thought they were. And so because of that, they only brought 3 days worth of meat or 3 days worth of food because they thought, we're near the western edge. Second we get over that peak, there's like the valleys and hills of Chile, and we will find a town and we'll be saved. Clearly they were wrong because they trekked for 10 days. Sorry. So yeah, they had no technical gear, no map, no compass, and no climbing experience. They were literally just like YOLOing it.
Yeah, we're talking, they're 21-year-olds.
Yeah, from the city, down on the beach.
Yeah, rugby players, never like experienced anything like this, and to make this track that's why it's so amazing. Yep,
they had sort of a choice here as well. They could see a lower sort of peak to the west. Like a lower mountain peak that was actually quite a lot lower than the actual peak. It was sort of a similar height to where they were. In fact, a little bit lower. But then they would have had to climb sort of sideways. So they went, no, we're going like straight up and over this mountain. They thought that they would reach the peak in 1 day. Parado was often, like, he took the lead, Nando Parado, and he was sort of the leader, but he was often told to slow down by the others because obviously as they kept climbing, the air got thinner and thinner, and they were starting to have like oxygen issues and couldn't breathe fully and getting starved of oxygen. A lot of the time they were trekking like just waist deep in snow, like chest deep through the snow, trudging up like a super steep, peak. In the film that was made about this called Stranded, Canessa described how on the first night, on their way to the peak after they left the other survivors, the wind was blowing so strong that they struggled to find somewhere to put down the sleeping bag because they couldn't just be like exposed on the snow in the open. So they managed to find a rock ledge that was basically hanging over an abyss. Like, if you fell like 2,000 meters straight down. And he described it as the worst night of his life. Wind howling, you're sitting out there in a blanket, literally, if you go over that edge, you're done. And remember I said 1 day to reach the peak, right?
Yeah.
The climb was so slow that the survivors back at the fuselage could see them for 3 days. Yeah. Climbing up towards the peak. So it took them 3 days to make like a little base camp at the bottom of the peak, essentially. On the second day, Canessa thought he saw a road to the east. But Parado argued with him, sort of saying, like, because, they thought they have to go west to get to Chile. So he's like, east is the wrong way. We're not going that way. Turns out, had they gone that way, they probably would have found help quicker because it was a road. But obviously, they were, by this point, kind of a bit delirious, don't know if it's real or not. And in their mind, we're going west. We're not going east. East is just wrong.
Yeah, because they still have the false direction from the pilot.
Yeah, well, it was still the right direction, but they thought they were a lot closer to the town than they were. They were like 80 kilometers or something away.
Yeah, but still, if the pilot would have exactly known, he could have just said, go that way instead, because you have the main road. It was actually one of the main roads.
Yeah, exactly. So they probably would have found help a lot quicker. But of course, in the time, they debated. In the end, they didn't come to a decision, and they basically decided, you know what, we're going to just keep going the way we're currently going. Then on the third morning, they made the base camp at the bottom of the peak. They had a little bit to climb up. Canessa stayed at the camp while Parado and Vizintin reached the base of a near 100-meter vertical wall of snow and ice.
Hell.
It's 300 feet for Freedom Unit people. You can think of this as like the wall in Game of Thrones. It's almost vertical, snow and ice, about 100 meters, and then they knew like that's the peak. When we get up there, that's the peak. Determined to get out of there or die trying, Parado began using a stick that he had in his backpack to carve steps in the wall. And they carved out, he was followed by Vizintin, and they actually carved out little footholes and climbed straight up that vertical 100-meter wall. Almost like the steps in Lord of the Rings I'm seeing here in Minas Morgul.
Yeah.
Like, you know, just sort of not really steps by any stretch, but just finding a way to get up there. When they finally got to the summit, Parado got there first because he was taking lead, followed by Vizintin. The summit was 4,650 meters, and he thought he would see the green valleys of Chile below. To his shock, all he could see was mountains in every single direction, just tall, snow-covered peaks.
If that doesn't kill your morale, I don't know what would.
Yeah, I know, right? But like what I'm gathering from here, there's no times, but I think they must have got there pretty sort of late in the afternoon, because I guess you know, you're climbing 100 meters, sort of making steps as you're going along, taking your time, being careful. So of course, after seeing this, they went, "Oh, fuck!" So they climbed back down and joined Canessa back in sort of the base camp, I guess we could call it, at the bottom of that wall. What they had actually done, just for context, is they had climbed a mountain that basically the other side was Chile, they were still in Argentina. So if they go over that, it's the mountain on the very border of the two countries, which meant that they were still tens of kilometers from getting to the green valleys of Chile. But of course, because the pilot gave them the wrong information, they thought that they were much further in Chile than they actually were. So once again, the pilot strikes.
He's the real killer in the story, like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's basically his entire fault that this happened.
Yeah, everything is his fault.
So down in this base camp in that evening, they actually had a bottle of cognac with them that they took from the tail section of the plane. So they all sat around drinking cognac and sort of despairing. And Nando Parado turns to Roberto Canessa and he said, quote unquote, "Roberto, can you imagine how beautiful this would be if we were not dead men?" Because apparently that night had the sunset was beautiful. The sky was like orange and lavender tones, and
the Andes are beautiful. Like, let's not take away how magnificent this part of the planet actually is. But like Prado says, is basically, if we weren't dead men, this would be beautiful.
Yeah,
like,
literally turned to him like, yep.
Oh, fuck.
So at this point, remember, they took 3 days of food, and this is day 3. End of day 3. So the next morning, they realized the trek was going to take a lot longer than they thought. So Vizintin actually agreed, they came to an agreement that he'll go back to camp, because obviously they can't afford to feed 3 of them. So Canessa and Parado will keep the food, Vizintin goes back. And this is where the seats come in the sleigh. Because obviously at this point, it's all been uphill.
Yeah.
But they were only like... I think they had only traveled at this point like about a kilometer from the rest of the people, because, you know, they were going straight up the hill. It was like a fucking 45-degree incline, if not more. So what he did is, what Vizintin did is he took the sort of sled, the seat, and made a makeshift sled and slid back down the mountain all the way back to camp within under an hour. So it took him 3 days to get there, and he took an hour on the sled to slide down the glacier to get back to the rest of the others.
Yeah, like I've been watching a lot of interviews and with the survivors, especially Nando Prado. He has done a lot. It really goes to show that it takes, you never know how your body's going to respond in that situation.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, just me imagining that, I would have been like, deuces, bye. Like, I would have killed myself. I don't know, but that's the initial thought. Like, just
imagine if you were sliding down on the sleigh and you just went over a ledge back because you couldn't stop. Like, you've survived all this time, and then you're like, wee, this is really fun. Finally having some fun for the first time in 10 weeks, and just fucking floink.
Okay.
Like, go for the biggest jump in human history. But yeah, so he slid all the way down, and Parado and Canessa, they continued on. They climbed back up the peak, from the day before. It took them 3 hours to get up, so you can imagine how long making the steps and stuff took the day before, the whole day. And when Canessa got up there, because remember, he wasn't up there the day before, his very first thought was, we're dead. Because, he just saw mountains, 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 Gandalf. Mountains everywhere. But Parado saw 2 smaller peaks to the west that were not snow-covered. And immediately upon seeing that, he was positive, like, that's where we have to go. Because obviously, if they're not snow-covered, they're obviously not that tall, and it's to the west. And he could see there's sort of a valley from them. Yeah. So he was like, okay, we have to go that way, because there's probably, that's Chile, and that's the plains out there, the greenery, and that's where we're going to find villages and all that. So they followed the ridge of this mountain, heading down pretty quickly, obviously because it was quite a steep mountain, so they pretty quickly started descending. And they started heading towards that valley to the west, towards those 2 non-snow-covered mountaintops. They hiked for several more days in that direction, eventually reaching the valley that Parado had spotted, where they found the source of the Rio San Jose River, which is, at the very base of the mountain, and that sort of floods, I think, eventually into Lake Chile's largest river network, I believe. Yeah. They started following the river over the next sort of couple of days, and eventually came to what they call the snow line, which is a very distinct line where basically from that point down there's no snow, and from that point up there is snow. And it's quite, especially in the Andes, because it's quite rocky there. Yeah. So you can see very distinct, like almost like a line of just snow above and dirt below. Yeah, no, I've been... I'm not going to say that I've tracked the Andes. I've been near the mountains, and I've seen like that line. Yeah, it's very distinct. It's super distinct, and it's absolutely gorgeous, because you have this water trickling down from the mountain. You see where the snow ends and where all the flowers, especially if you go in spring, where you have all the flowers. It's absolutely beautiful. Yep. And I must say, that's the best water I've ever drank in my life. It's like the freshest mountain water you can get. Yeah, so just like out of the like little trickling that's going down, just drinking that is so cool. It's absolutely delicious. Do it. If you ever near the mountains, it's the best water you will ever drink. Yep. So once they sort of came out of the snow line, obviously that sort of gave them a lot of hope, because like, sick, no more snow. It's starting to get a bit warmer. Like the days at this point, because this is December in the southern hemisphere in Chile, where it does get hot. So, the days were quite warm. The nights were still cold. But, they could feel like, okay, it's starting to get warmer. The nights aren't as cold. Awesome. So as they were following the river, they eventually found evidence of like human presence, because they found like an old campsite, like recently camped sort of area. And they're like, okay, well, clearly someone's been here. So spirits go through the roof all of a sudden. Yeah. On the 9th day of this trek, so this is 6 days after they set off from the peak. Yeah. They found some cows in a field. So clearly there's a farmer somewhere. Yeah. They actually rested that evening there, and this was down by the edge of the river, on the southern bank of that river. But by this point, like, Canessa was unable to go on. He was exhausted, could not trek any further. That evening, as the 2 of them, Parado and Canessa, were actually gathering firewood, they saw 3 men on the other side of the river on horseback. But of course, because of the sound of the river, even though they were yelling out and hoo-hawing and trying to get their attention, like, they couldn't hear each other. They couldn't communicate. But thankfully, one of the men happened to see them. And all he yelled at them, which they heard, was tomorrow. Obviously in Spanish, so mañana, I guess. So the next day, the man actually did return. And he attached a piece of paper and a pencil to a rock and threw it over on a piece of string across the river. And this is where Parado wrote a note that said the following, translated to English. Ali could read this in Spanish to you, but we're not going to do that because I don't think we have a big Spanish audience. So, quote unquote, like translated, this is what the note said. I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am a Uruguayan. We've been walking for 10 days. I have a wounded friend up there. In the plane, there are still 14 injured people. We have to get out from here quickly, and we don't know how. We don't have any food. We are weak. When are you going to come to fetch us? Please, we cannot even walk. Where are we? And then he put the note back and threw it back to the guy across the river. The man who had thrown the note over and then read the note was a man called Sergio Catalan. Sergio Catalan. He was a Chilean muleteer, also known as an arriero. And yeah, he read the note and confirmed to them that he understood. He was like, okay, cool, understood. He then went back and talked to two other men. One of them actually recalled that a few weeks earlier, the father of Carlos Paez, so the man that was good at sewing, had actually asked them, or like around that area, if they had heard of the crash in the Andes. So this is back in the early 70s. These people are in a very remote part of town. Yeah. Maybe news hasn't got there. But one of the men actually recalled, like, oh yeah, someone, like a father of someone actually came and asked about this. So maybe it's legit. Like maybe these people are for real. So then Sergio Catalan went back and he threw some bread to the men across the river, to Parado and Canessa, and then he rode for 10 hours on horseback to get help. Yeah. So during the trip, he actually saw another muleteer that was across the other side of the bank, the correct side where Canessa and Parado was, because obviously the river's flowing, you know, with mountain water. It's you can't just
swim across.
Kind of swim across. Yeah. Too strong current. So he told them, like, hey, there's two, like, people there that need help. This is where they are. Go and get them. So that man actually went and collected them and took them to the town of Los Maitenes. Los Maitenes. Maitenes. Yes. Yeah, whatever. He took them there, okay? I'm not Chilean. I'm not Spanish. Give me a break. I'm doing my best. Eventually, on his way down, Sergio Catalan stopped a truck on a road and managed to convince them to take him to a police station in a town called Puente Negro.
Puente Negro?
Point Black?
Puente is bridge.
Black. The Black Bridge.
Yeah.
The police in Puente Negro relayed the message straight away to the military in, I think, another southern Chilean city, who then referred it to the military in Santiago. And, of course, then a full-scale search and rescue was kickstarted. Meanwhile, Parado and Canessa were taken by the other muleteer, the arriero, to Los Maitenes de Curicó on horseback, and they were fed and allowed to rest. So in total, they had hiked 38 miles, or 61 kilometers, over the 10 days, as I said before. And Canessa had lost almost half his body weight since the crash. He weighed only 44 kilograms, or 97 pounds. Like, for context, I weigh probably 104. I mean, I'm a tiny bit overweight, but I'm also quite a large man. Yeah. But, like, I think an average person is probably, 80 to 90 kilos for an average man?
Yeah.
So, yeah, he lost a lot of weight. And, of course, so once they got back to town and sort of news broke out pretty quickly internationally that there were survivors of the crash, because obviously no one expected survivors, at all. So the Chilean military immediately set out with some helicopters, and sort of they didn't go the same day because it was, I think, sort of in the evening, but they went closer to, I think, Los Maitenes and made sort of like a base with a few helicopters and rescue crew and all that, and then the next morning they set out. But of course, because of the altitude and the terrain, the helicopter could only take like 50% capacity, because obviously the air is so thin there, they can't carry as much weight and all of that. So what they actually did is they were flying as well, because it was dense fog. So in the morning they had to fly under instrument conditions, which again is, no visibility out the window because it's too cloudy. Yeah. They made another sort of little base camp closer, and then the fog cleared in around midday on the 22nd of December, 1972. So they crashed on October 13th. This is December 22nd. It's 72 days total. So then 2 helicopters carrying search and rescue set out, reached the survivors. Some of the crew actually then stayed overnight with the remaining because they couldn't take everyone in one day. So they took about half of the survivors back in one day, and some rescue people stayed overnight with blankets and food and kept them warm. And then the next morning, they collected the final survivors.
Yeah. And something that you missed out, because Nando actually went on the helicopter to actually point it out, because they did.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry. Yes. And they were amazed.
Yeah, they were amazed. They were like, no one, like, at first he's like, no, it's down there. And they're like, no, there's nothing there, because obviously they're still at the altitude. They can't see shit.
Yeah.
And Nando's like, no, it is down there. I climbed that fucking valley. It is down there.
Yeah, and they were amazed. They like, no one can climb that.
Yeah.
Like, it's impossible.
And then they find the survivors, and they took 3 of them first, because he lifted it on to the helicopter.
Yep. Yeah, and because of the steepness as well, the helicopter could only put one, like, of the side, they call them skirts, on the ground, I guess you could call it. So the helicopter itself was basically hovering constantly above the snow as they were piling on survivors. It was like an incredible rescue effort as well.
Yeah.
So, well done to them. So yeah, of course, then news broke, internationally. The survivors had been taken to hospitals in Santiago for evaluation. Almost all of them were suffering from like altitude sickness, dehydration, frostbite, broken bones, scurvy, and malnutrition. And yeah, the final survivors were rescued on the 23rd of December 1972, and the ordeal was almost sort of over.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. But of course, one of the big points was the burial of the dead. Because, of course, being, South America is a very religious part of the world. Very Catholic.
Fortunately.
Very Catholic. And so, of course, like, burying the dead is sort of seen as, something that has to happen. But one of the problems was the rescuers were Chilean and the bodies were in Argentina.
Yeah.
And not only that, after some discussion, they sort of came to the conclusion that, like, obviously, as some of them, I think 15 bodies were almost fully eaten. And just like skeletons, and then there was like 12 or so untouched. But they sort of came to the conclusion that it's impractical to go and get those bodies because the terrain was so dangerous.
You're just risking another crash or anything.
Even with a helicopter and gear and crews, like, it was so dangerous. They said we can't do it.
Yeah, that's usually what happens with people that climb Mount Everest and the Himalayas and everything. Like, they just leave the bodies because it's more it's a greater risk to expose yourself to try and go to save these people than to actually let them just rest up on the mountain.
Well, they did do one thing. They took a Catholic priest with them, and they went up there and they made like a shared grave, sort of site. So they collected the bodies and they made a little orange iron cross they put in the ground and like a little stone monument where they buried the bodies. So yeah, there was just to confirm as well, there was 13 untouched bodies and 15 that had been eaten and were like more skeleton than person. But one of the men, Ricardo Echevarren, had actually requested that his body get taken back to Uruguay to be buried. He wanted to be buried. So his father, upon hearing this, of course, demanded to be able to get his son.
Yeah.
Because, the authorities just said, we can't. Like, it's too dangerous. We can't. Your son's in this grave, in this sort of shared burial site. So what he did is he asked the priest to put a tag on his son's body. And then he privately organized an expedition to go, and he dug up, knowing that, that was his son's body. He took his son's body and took it back to Uruguay. Then, of course, upon returning to Uruguay, he was arrested immediately for grave robbing.
Yeah.
But then a Supreme Court judge and the local mayor, a federal judge and the local mayor actually intervened and said, like, no, like, he's not going to be charged because, he's just fulfilling his son's will and, you should have a right to bury your loved ones and so on. So in the end, he got permission to bury his son legally. But yeah, he actually went on a personal expedition at his own cost and got his son from the grave up there and returned him back, which was, quite sad.
Floats your boat.
Yeah, and then the shitstorm broke out. Also, straight after they survived, and of course people started asking questions of the survivors in the immediate days after the recovery on the sort of 26th, 27th of December. Like,
This is something that is really funny because obviously they were taken to a hospital where they had to get evaluated and assessed.
Yeah.
There were a lot of police obviously to guard them because obviously it's a media frenzy
from all over the world.
From all over the world. And the police actually denied Nando Prado to come in to where the sick people, like where the survivors were. It's like, no, this is only for survivor but obviously because he looked not what you would think if someone's been starving for 60 days, you would imagine a skeleton. But he looked relatively normal in a sense.
Yeah, a bit thin, but not too bad.
And he's like, but I am a survivor. And they wouldn't let him through, but eventually they let him through.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe that he looked that normal.
Yeah, and it was because they obviously they started quizzing them, and at first they were like, oh, we had eaten some cheese and other food we found on the plane, and then there was some local plants and herbs and stuff that we managed to survive on, and people were like, well, it doesn't really add up. You're on a glacier, right? You're snow covered. How is there plants and stuff there? There's not even like birds.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. So then on the 23rd of December, so the final day they actually got rescued, the last survivors, a news report of cannibalism started being published worldwide. At this point, unconfirmed. And except in Uruguay. Because I think that was kind of like local heroes at this point in time. Like, oh my God, they survived. Then on the 26th of December, 2 pictures were taken by family members of the Andean Relief Corps, which I guess is like some sort of rescue for the group for the Andes, of a half-eaten human leg. And that was printed on the front page of 2 Chilean newspapers, the El Mercurio and La Tercera de la Hora.
El Mercurio y La Tercera de la Hora.
Yes, them.
Yeah.
And they reported that all the survivors resorted to cannibalism. So, Merry Christmas indeed. The survivors ended up holding a press conference on the 28th of December at Stella Maris College in Montevideo, which is back in Uruguay. They got sent back home.
Video.
Whatever, good enough. Where they recounted the events of the last 72 days. Alfredo Delgado spoke for the survivors. He compared their actions to that of the Last Supper, like Jesus Christ at the Last Supper, during which he gave his disciples the Eucharist. What a weird word. I'm not religious. I have no idea what that is. The survivors received a lot of initial public backlash, obviously, for being cannibals and then seen as very wrong. But they ended up being sort of having their sins forgiven by a priest. He said you haven't sinned because of the extreme conditions by which, and they also explained the sacrifice of the survivors when they all agreed that if I die, you have my permission to eat me so that you can live.
Yeah, but that's it. Like I mentioned this in the last episode too. Is this is a story that I've heard, but it's always been out of the aspect of the cannibalism. And I don't know if it is because my family is Chilean, and when it comes to South America, we all hate each other. We do. Not really, but there's always shit talking about other countries.
Yeah, of course.
But so I've always known the story as the Uruguayans who ate they became cannibals up in the mountains, and that's always been my image. But now that I've actually researched it, it's so amazing to see how their survival story and how you can minimalize it to something in a sense so minor as cannibalism. You there's nothing out there to eat.
Look, I'm saying straight away, I would eat people.
Yeah.
If I'm in that situation, either that or just die.
Yeah,
right. That'd be I'm either gonna eat you to survive, or I'm just gonna take my death early. Why would I suffer in misery for weeks?
Yeah. And it isn't even categorized as cannibalism, because cannibalism is the intense thought of killing someone of your own species to survive. These people were already dead.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't kill. Well, that was one of the rumors, though. There were rumors that they actually killed people to get the meat. But of course, it came out no. We all agreed that if and when we died, then we would provide life to someone else, basically.
Yeah.
So it ended up being resolved, and the families, especially once the families started sort of understand, the families of the people that got eaten, started understanding, the criticism sort of died away, and now you're sort of left with, there's some books that have been written by Nando Parado and Canessa. There's the movie Stranded. I think there's actually a couple of movies. Yeah, there's a bunch. There's
Alive.
There's a lot that's also like inspired by.
Yeah.
Even in Rick and Morty, there's like a parody of it.
Hey, is it?
Yeah, in the Vat of Acid episode.
Okay.
So the survivors of the plane can actually be seen on the side of that plane that crashed in that episode.
Okay.
So yeah, and of course there's documentaries, there's been music inspired by it, there's even been a couple of stage plays, there's been 4 or 5 like autobiographies and things like that written about it. So if you want to like get more intimate with it and the thoughts, because I read through a bit of it, and the thoughts of some of it is, obviously like the things that in the discussions they had, of course, would have been pretty hollow and like despair filled.
Yeah.
So it's quite incredible. But yeah, 16 people in total survived out of, I think, the 45 originally, which, considering it took 72 days till the last survivor was rescued. I mean, that's
amazing.
It's incredible, really.
Yeah. There's a lot out there, like you can search on YouTube and actually hear Nando Prado and Canessa speak themselves, and even other survivors, and they tell the story. I watched a documentary about it, and it's fucking incredible. Like, hats off to them. Like,
I mean, having the will, especially at that point, like the two of them ultimately, well, the 3 of them originally that set off right on this final expedition, and then even Byzantine, I guess, to accept that, you know what, like my role to play in this is to not go to find people. It's to, in order for you guys to have more food and stuff, I'm going to go back with the survivors and tough it out in the hope that you guys find people.
Yeah.
Which I guess can be really difficult, because obviously you want to be in control of your own situation as much as possible, but you're basically saying, you know what, I trust you guys. I'm going to do the thing. I'm going to slide back down this mountain on my aircraft seat and join the others in starvation and misery and eating our loved ones and friends, while the other 2 pushed on. And even the other side, like, the people that, 10 weeks with broken limbs and gangrene and scurvy, these people survived.
Yeah.
Even if like they weren't in a state where they probably should have, they found a way. So
that's just goes to show how resilient the human bodies actually are. I don't know, because you don't get put in any situations like this very rarely in your life, but just
hopefully I never have to.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah, but just the thought of like the sheer willpower to want to survive, how important something like that is, and Prado explained this in a documentary I was watching, like how important it is to build a character before you end up in these sort of situations, because you don't know where a leader is going to emerge and how important that actually is for us as people, because we always have someone that leads us in a sense.
Yeah, well, humans, we're community creatures. Like, you live in groups and clans and families, and humans don't do well by themselves. Yeah. Like, it's very well documented that being alone is very bad for your mental well-being.
Yeah.
So in this case, having, like, I think in the previous episode we said that, they were all despairing when they heard that the search and rescue being called off. But having, I think it was Nando Parado, sort of stand up and go, this is good news. Yeah. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? How's this good news? And he said, well, that means that we are now in control. We have to get out of here. Not, no one's coming for us, so let's do it. And just having someone out of, everyone could have despaired, but just having that one person that speaks up and goes, no. It's not the end of the world. We're going to do it. Yeah. And then to his credit, he stepped out with Roberto Canessa, and they did it.
Yeah. It's bloody amazing.
Tell you what, I mean, I would have got tired trekking for like 5 minutes through that snow. There's no way I could have done that for 10 days. Yeah. Like, no way at all.
Fucking, there are mornings here in winter when I just look out and like we have actual roads and stuff, and I'm like, no, I'm not going up. Too much snow, too much ice, not risking it.
Yep. And it's like 2 centimeters on the ground.
Yeah. And I'm like, no. I'm not going to do it.
So yeah, that's the incredible story of sort of surviving the Andes. And sort of going back to your point, like I thought, should I call it to get more views or whatever, cannibals, Uruguayan cannibals. And I was like, you know what, but it's not fair.
Yeah.
Because I'll do the exact same thing in that situation. So we called it Surviving the Andes, and this was part 2. And I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. Even if you knew about it and you knew about the cannibal side of it, that, that wasn't just what happened.
Yeah. It's like, it's my perspective of it. It's like, I've always, like, I known about this story. I know that it happened, but I've always just seen the cannibal aspect out of it. And that's what you usually focus on. But when you actually read about it or hear about it and take your time to look into it, it's so much bigger.
Yeah.
And I was always in the mindset like, oh yeah, Uruguayans, they crashed and they ate the dead ones. And then obviously, like, you have the whole incident with the football player that bit the ear, and
Suarez
and stuff like that. And it's just like, people like to shit talk, but it's like, these people, like Nando Prado and Canessa and everyone that survived that, they're extraordinary people.
Yes.
And I don't think many people would survive. Like, if you're in a room,
Hell no.
and to say you're in a room with 40 people, it's like, and everything went out, power's out, temperature drops and stuff.
Yeah, and that's not even factoring in you survived a plane crash.
Yeah.
You know, one guy's been impaled and survives for another several weeks until an avalanche comes in the middle of the night and kills him.
Yeah. No, but it's...
You got broken bones, you get gangrene.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Injuries.
They're amazing people and extraordinary people beyond belief.
Definitely. And so, credit to them, and incredible that they survived. And if you want to learn more, like I said, just there's a whole bunch of different media platforms you can look at them. YouTube, great example, where you can learn more, especially on a personal level, getting their recounts of the events.
Yeah.
Well, without further ado, that's the end of this two-parter. Hope you enjoyed it, and no idea what we're doing in the next episode, but I'm pretty positive Andy will be back, so probably some bullshit, because I don't know if it's Andy's episode, but I'm sure he's been cooking something up for the last month that he's had a little break.
Yeah.
He's got some ridiculous idea in his brain, as he always does. And where can you find us on Instagram, Ali?
Yeah, you can go and follow us at @random.podcast, so at.random.podcast.
And on Twitter, we are @_randompod. And as always, we do have a Discord channel. Obviously, the times we're changing a little bit, though, so just keep an eye out. If you want to join us live when Andy's back, we're probably going to be recording a bit earlier in the day on Sundays for us. Just obviously, again, as we spoke about in the previous episode, life getting in the way. We have to change a couple of things. But we'll keep you posted on that. But feel free to jump in there and join and give suggestions for episodes and feedback on things you liked, or just if you want to have a chat to us, that's cool. Jump in and do it. It's open to anyone. So,
Link in the description down
Link
below.
in the description below. And we will get in your ears next time, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
Bye.
Bye.